Welcome to A Woman's Heart. I am looking forward to this conversation for many reasons, but welcome to the show, Sarah Clarkson.
Thank you so much. It's lovely to be here.
Yes, and as I mentioned, I love the accent. You mentioned it's not too strong, as since you're over in England in a different time zone, and I am really looking forward to this conversation. As I indicated before we started recording, that I believe I will have a lot to learn and gain from this conversation, especially after the holidays, as we start a new year and we come out of this crazy holiday season. Looking forward to the new year and talking about this. But before we get into the topic, I would love to get to know you, let my listeners get to know you. So tell us a little bit about yourself and something fun that isn't normally in your bio.
I'm Sarah. I live in Oxford, England. I'm from America originally, but about 10 years ago, I came to Oxford to study theology and you know, kind of fell in love with theology, fell in love with my Dutch husband,
Mm.
and stayed. And it's been 10 years. So my husband is now what they call a vicar here in England.
Okay.
He's an Anglican priest, and we live in the vicarage, which is an old Victorian house right across from the
Mm.
church where he serves. And we have four little children, three girls and one boy, all under 7 years old. So life is a grand party most of the
Oh,
time.
yes, it is.
And yeah, we live here. I write um, when in between times and always have. And yeah, we live we love our old house. Yeah, I guess maybe my funny fact is well, I'll do two. People tend to think you mentioned the accent that either that my husband and I, who's my husband's Dutch and Danish, everybody just assumes we're Irish now. I think that they just blend the American, the Dutch, and the English and just assume that we're from Ireland. So that's
Okay.
why, which was fine with me because I've always loved Celtic music. So I always wanted to be mistaken as Irish. And then our other thing
Yes.
is I never knew how much I would love living in a house with a willow tree in the garden. Willows are very great presences. She's like a queen. So we have a great
Mm.
willow tree in the garden, and it's one of the small glories of living here.
Oh, wonderful. And it does. It sounds beautiful and very peaceful. And I imagine it was a great place to explore and write your book about reclaiming quiet. So, did the willow tree play a part in that at all?
Do you know it didn't hugely because much of the book was written before we moved here, and much of it was
Okay.
conceived before we moved here. So it was kind of hammered out after we moved here, but much of it had been outlined before we took up residence. So she was a comfort, and I spent many hours on a quilt under the shade with my children. So in that sense, she
Oh.
contributed to the peacefulness that attends writing, at least sometimes.
Yes, yes. Well, and then during the book launch, then it could be a source of
Exactly.
peace and quiet during
Exactly.
during the launch. Well, you mentioned it was already organized or and laid out, but I imagine the reclaiming quiet came out of a reason that you felt you needed to pursue that. And I
Mhm.
would love to hear why you wanted to write a book about quiet in such a busy world that we have.
Absolutely. For the last several years, whenever I've told anyone the topic I'm writing on, they laugh in my face as my four children dance around us. So it's it's the Lord has a sense of humor.
Yes, he
Um,
does.
I began working on it at the end of the first pandemic year here in England, and um, it had been, I guess it was December 2020 would have been to January 2021, and I had come kind of to the end of the year, and I was praying one day and realized that even though I come to, I could have silence on the outside, I had come to a place where I had very little interior quiet. I didn't have the capacity to be quiet within myself.
Yeah.
And a lot of that had to do with, I feel like during the pandemic, in the isolation and the lockdowns and the checking on family and friends, we became, watching headlines. I had become quite addicted to my phone, quite, it's just very used to checking it as a default
Yeah.
position of my life. And I think at the moment that I realized I didn't have the capacity to be quiet in myself, I just immediately had a deep sense of that this is distressing because if I can't be quiet, then I can't listen. And if I can't listen, then how am I going to hear the voice of God speaking within me? And so I read Psalm 23 that day. Just it happened to be in my regular reading rhythm and just really played that the Lord would teach me that year about what it meant to be led into quiet places and to kind of reclaim it. Well, thus began 3 of the least quiet years of my life. Between us, we had appendicitis, pneumonia, hospitalizations for asthma, pandemics, another 2 babies. We
Oh my
moved three
goodness.
times, uh, had multiple family deaths. And in the middle of it all, I remember just thinking, Lord, I don't understand what you mean by this, because I think I started the book out thinking I will read five, I'll order 5 books on contemplation and I will figure out how to be disciplined enough to be very quiet and very deep. And I
Mm.
think what happened in the midst of it was I realized if the if what was required to be quiet was that I have lots of time and lots of discipline to kind of attain quiet as a feat, then it was something that was not going to be available to me, nor is it going to be available to very many people that I knew in the modern world. But
Yeah.
if it was something, so at that point I began to kind of change and pray about changing my definition, and I write about in the book, but through being in a friend's house, being in several other experiences, came to a point of realizing quiet is not a feat we accomplish, it's a homeland we return to. Quiet, I really believe, is the place that we come at any given minute. It is available, the place we come to listen to the heart, where God waits to meet with us. Um, and I
Yeah.
think, is it something we can be disciplined about? Yes. Is it something we
Yeah.
can create the conditions for in our lives? Yes. But it's not primarily something, it's not like exercise. It's not a feat I attain. It's a home I return to. And once I changed that definition, I began to realize it's something that is available to me in the smallest snatches of time. I mean, I have 4 children under the age of 7. I haven't had more than 10 minutes of quiet time in about
Oh,
5 years.
no, no, not even in the bathroom hardly. I've been there. I had three, and when they were
Yeah.
little, yes.
Yeah. And so I think if I had written the book in the first year, it would have been, much more, here's how I figured out how to do quiet. And having been written in its third and fourth year after 3 deadline extensions, it's very much a witness to what I believe is an urgent truth that we're losing in a world with all the noise of iPhones and our busyness and our entertainment and our hurry, is that God waits at every moment to meet with us, to speak with us, that there is this deep blessed place that we can come to at any given time
Yeah.
to be restored, to be healed. Yeah.
Yeah. I love the idea that you said that it was a home to come back to. And you also acknowledged it's not so much that, oh, you reclaim quiet by somehow having nothing on your schedule and nobody interrupting you and everything in life working out well, because the chances of that happening, that in itself is going to be a small snatch of time
Very much
given
so.
our current world, and certainly with young children running around. And I have adult children who I'm blessed live in the area, so I get to see them, but even they have things that, mom, I need this happen. I have aging parents, I have aging mother-in-law. There's always something there's an event that's coming up, there's something here that somebody needs help with, so there's always going to be something to pull us away and distract us. And so I'm drawn to, you mentioned a lot of it being more internal, so that
Mhm.
it's much more of an internal calm and an internal quiet than it is an external quiet.
Yeah. And I think it's something we can cultivate, but it is about, and that's where I think I've become really concerned for myself. And I think the larger culture, I think there's a lot of research that bears this out with the presence of our smartphones and our screens, because
Mhm.
I do think, having outward quiet and never having demands or people around, that's not going to be what happens to most of us.
Yeah.
But I think one of the marvelous things of being human is that we all have this interior world. We have the inside of ourselves.
Mhm.
But I think we increasingly in our quiet turn to screens that draw us into kind of this, just this, what, of course there are good things that come, but I think when we habitually turn to a screen in times of quiet, we just create this space in which we are never able to come to a place of attention or listening or wonder or creativity or prayer. I
Yeah.
think a real moment of conviction for me was realizing that that the iPhone had become a replacement to me for the Holy Spirit. It had become the great comforter of my anxious
Mm.
moments, of my bewildered moments. The very things that the Holy Spirit is supposed to do, comfort us, be a source of wisdom, of, help in times of trouble. Increasingly, in a moment of distress or fear or guilt, I was turning to my iPhone to distract me or to answer my questions or to,
Wow.
yeah. And I
Yeah.
think that when I realized that, I realized I need to refigure and reclaim these quiet moments because they are forming the deepest parts of my life. These little snatched moments of either time on my screen or time to be quiet are really going to shape the quality of how I live.
Yeah, and they do say that the screens are actually rewiring our brains and that we're
Very
not
much so.
necessarily built for that. And the other thing that struck me with different studies and such was that we now, I think, officially have the attention span of less than a goldfish.
Oh, it's
That
so
a
painful.
goldfish can have a longer attention span than we can,
Yeah.
and there are definitely times when I relate, things are going on and it's like whoop, there we go, here's a
Yeah.
distraction. And those have struck me that, yeah, it's just really, it's so changing. And there are good things about it. The fact that you can be in England and I can be here in Virginia and we're talking and seeing each other and having a delightful conversation. That is an upside to
Yeah.
technology.
Very
And that
much.
we can send this conversation out that people can listen to all around the world at whenever is convenient for them to listen to. So there are definitely upsides to the technology. But as you mentioned, when you said that you were noticing your phone was becoming the comforter instead of the
Yeah.
Holy Spirit, I kind of went, "Ooh, wow."
I know.
I'm like, and
Definitely.
and I thought of the number of times I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I'm stressed. I'm stressed. I need to," and I will. I have a coloring app on my phone, and I'm like, I'm just going to do this for a little bit and calm down. But and maybe and that's fine. That's fine every now and again.
Yeah.
But yeah, maybe I don't need to pick that up every single time. And I should turn to it. And I love it says, the book is Reclaiming Quiet, cultivating a life of holy attention. And I love that. I love that the idea of you mentioned cultivating it, but the holy
Mm.
attention. And to me, that says really turning to the Holy Spirit instead of all of the other distractions in the world.
Yeah. And I think that quiet bears with it. Um, I think, I think there's an aspect of our increasing screen dependence that we're just losing out on the richness of what it means to be human, the way God created
Mhm.
us to encounter reality, not a screen, but
Yeah.
nature and its glory, children and their immediacy and wonder. I think that there is a way of living that invites us into a moment by moment encounter with God's goodness in the smallest details of our ordinary. But I think it does require a rooting in quiet because that's the place where we come back to attention, where we come back to a place of being aware of the tiniest details of our day and the places where God arrives within them.
hmm Now, and we've both mentioned and admitted that life doesn't always cooperate with this. You kind of have to be intentional about pursuing and cultivating this quiet. What are some of the things that you found helped you do that? So listeners are going, okay, yeah, that's great. How do I do it?
Yeah. I think something I've come to um, really see is I think for a long time I kept creating rules for myself of when I would not use my phone and how to discipline these things. And what I realized was I was still working from the idea of a life that kind of went from screen to screen. And what I'm trying to increasingly do is think of my life as tethered in a as rooted in a world that's not the screen. So when I think something I really on a practical level do is I'm trying to claim mornings and evenings because I think that if you can begin the morning with attention and prayer and quiet, and if you can close the day with a certain amount of attention and quiet, it creates a framing that really, I think, allows you to experience the world and yourself a different way. So I try, and I'm not perfect by any means. And the irony of me doing much of my work online is not lost on me. But yeah, I try to begin I try not to pick up my phone until after breakfast. And instead, I try to begin with attention, with looking out the window. What is the day? Gerard Manley Hopkins said, the weather is news from God. So, what news is in the sky today?
Oh,
Let me read a passage of scripture. Let me read a single poem. And if all the prayer I can pray is the Jesus prayer, then let me pray that. And if it's 5 minutes or less, let that still be the anchoring thing that I do. The second thing I do is and kind of similar for the evening, 2 minutes of writing something I'm grateful for in my journey. Sometimes my husband and I say compliment together. Sometimes I say a single prayer. just
Mhm.
to, to close the day, to say, this day opens and closes in attention to my maker and to all the goodness I've seen. The other thing I think in a virtual age, in a hurried age, um, I think something really important is rooting ourselves in the present, doing things that are
Mhm.
very physical and tangible, thinking about it, having a moment of thinking about I try to really enjoy my cup of coffee and look out the window and see what's happening in the garden. Having small children is obviously one of the most exhausting things I've ever done, but I think I've increasingly realized that with children comes a very rare invitation to enter into the way they see the world, which is immediate, which is
Yes.
wonder filled, which is urgent in the sense of they're not hurried, but everything is miracle. And it's
Mhm.
hard as adults to accommodate ourselves to that. But I realize that is my daily invitation is to enter into their worlds and ways of seeing, which is a grace. And I understand more and more what Jesus means by become as a child, because in that space,
Yeah.
you attend, you watch everything, and every person that comes into your space is sacred and wondrous.
Mhm.
So, I mean,
Yeah.
those are small things, but I think that's a place to begin.
Yeah, well, and you mentioned being aware and being in the present. I'm reminded of a technique that if someone is having an anxiety attack or
Mm-hmm.
a panic attack, one of the techniques that is taught is to really be aware of your senses and try to
Yeah.
think of like five things you can see, like four things you can hear, something you can smell, something
Yeah.
you maybe taste, something you can feel, and it grounds you. It's that paying attention to exactly what is around you, what you can see, what you can hear, what you can touch, what you can smell. It helps ground us and calm our brain because
Yeah.
if we're really frazzled, literally our brain is just like short circuiting.
Yeah.
And it's hard to think clearly because it's shut down the logic part of our brain. And but when we can do that, we bring ourselves back down and we can start thinking logically. We can maybe think of a solution to a problem as opposed to just stressing about what the problem is. Or we can just calm ourselves down to
Mm.
enjoy it. And that's what when you mentioned that being part of the present, that was one of the things that I thought of was, yeah, it is. It's very grounding, very centering, very calming to really sit and take a minute to look around and see what is going on and feeling and tasting and using our senses for the present
Well,
moment.
I think it's really interesting, and I this would need a whole other book to explore, but I think the more I've studied quiet and researched it, the more you see that quiet is recognized across all disciplines as being good for the human body and soul.
Mm-hmm.
We live in an era of increasing mental illness, and I have mental illness, so I live with
Yeah.
that on a daily level. We live in the era of anxiety attacks, of stressed out bodies and diseases that come just from stress. And literally across all fields, it's recognized deep breathing, attention,
Mm-hmm.
standing out in nature and breathing good air, attending well to what we eat, taking time to bring our bodies to a place of peace. Like this is good for us. And you kind of go, well, I guess God knew what he was doing when he created us in this way. But it reflects I think what I realized is what I craved spiritually was actually quite good for my body. And that's
Mm-hmm.
something that I also in writing the book increasingly realized is quiet is not an abstraction. It's not just something we attain by subtracting noise and people, and it's not a work of subtraction. It's a very embodied work. We create
Mm-hmm.
embodied rhythms by which we rest, we attend, we make time, we center ourselves. It is not a subtraction. It's a
Mm-hmm.
creative work.
Yeah, well, because I can imagine too, there are times when even if there isn't physical noise around me, or if there's not a lot of people, I can be by myself in a quiet place, but
Yeah.
I'm not quiet. My
Yes.
mind can be racing, my heart, I could be tense. My mind can be swirling with stuff. So even if my external surroundings are fairly calm and quiet, that doesn't mean that I am.
No, very much so. No, I think absolutely. Yeah.
Now, did you find as you were studying this, it became easier? And then did you notice other things that were benefiting from your being a little more quiet on the inside?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I wouldn't say it became easier. I'd say if anything, I've had two babies since I started writing the book, and my levels of exhaustion are kind of off the chart. And when I'm exhausted is the time that I most usually, default to scrolling my phone. So it
Yes.
is by no means easier. I think in some ways it's just revealed to me um, the level of battle it is. But I think if anything, I started out convicted of it. I am now thoroughly convicted that this is going to be my lifelong work to continue to create an
Mhm.
ever deeper presence of quiet in my life. And I think what I realized is this isn't something that is, kind of a standalone subject that some people are called to and some people aren't. It's not just for introverts. It's not just
Yeah.
for, you know, people who are going to go be nuns or monks. It's not. This is for everyone.
Hmm.
This is fundamental spiritual life
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
If we cannot be quiet, we cannot listen. But if we're quiet, it's not just about our devotional lives and prayer. Quiet is also the place where we have the capacity to imagine, to create any work
Yeah.
of art, any piece of music, any story that's written has to come from that interior place of quiet. I think even relationship in that sense, when we are all so distracted by our own insecurities, by the voices of the world, we don't attend well to people in front of us. When we attend to someone from a place of deep quiet, we truly see them and are present to them in a
Hmm.
really healing and potent way. And so I think in that sense, I just see the way that this quiet as a rooting of an entire life alters and shifts the whole way that we live.
Yeah, I like the way you pointed out that that creativity and that relationships are really enhanced or brought about
Yeah.
from that quiet place. And
Yeah.
what other than just we've talked about the world and all the distractions and stuff that goes on, what have you found are some of the biggest challenges? Maybe internally to, we may recognize in our head that we go, yes, that is something good. This is good for
Yeah.
me. It's good for my body. It's good for my mind, good for my relationships. This would be a good thing for me to do. And yet we don't do it.
Yeah.
What have you found are some of those biggest hurdles or challenges to either make the connection or get through to actually implementing it?
I think two things. I think one is quiet can be a terrifying place to go because
Mhm. Okay.
if we
Yeah.
become quiet, we have to face what grieves us, the
Mhm.
the need that we're pushing down and medicating by distraction, the loneliness that may be with us. To turn off the noise, to go away from the screens. I think the first person we meet in quiet is ourselves, and oftentimes we're a fractured and frail and fragmented self. And so I think
Yeah.
there is an instinctive, avoidance of quiet that is played on by the broken world.
Mhm.
Um, if we listen to it, I think it only draws us into more disquiet. Um,
Yes, it does.
but I think that can be, and I would say very strongly, when I write about the book, the first person we meet is ourselves, the second person we meet is God, who is the gracious one who heals that. But it does require us being willing to meet what is raw and honest within ourselves,
Mhm.
which is, I would say, the only way we can really heal ourselves of those things or be healed.
Well, yeah, because if we're constantly distracting ourselves and avoiding it, it never
Yeah.
really, we may heal on the outside, but it doesn't really heal on the inside. It's just kind of you know,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. And the second thing I would say is, just on a very practical level, is exhaustion. Quiet, I don't think it takes a lot of work, but it does take a certain amount of concentration and attention. And, I think the average amount of sleep I'm getting right now at night means I don't often come to the evenings and like, I'm going to sit and meditate for an hour. I just don't have that kind of
You'd
stamina.
fall asleep.
Well, A, I'd fall asleep. And B, I found that because I'm so exhausted and overstimulated, I actually need, before I can come to a place of finding quiet to be fruitful and helpful, I need a way to walk back. And so I really
Uh-huh.
have come to believe in practices of what I'd call walking back to quiet. So for me, a huge part of that is reading,
Okay.
having, and not reading spiritual books, reading novels, reading poetry, reading books that I just cannot wait to sit down to. And there's actually like research for this. Like if you read a novel
Yeah.
for 8 minutes, there's a research paper out there that says you literally are lowering the stress levels in every part of your body. It's miserable. And I think having things like that, I increasingly at night when I'm rocking my baby to sleep, we listen to, which I'm so lucky that she enjoys, we listen to choral music together. And
Oh.
that's a way. I'm not at the point where I can pray deeply when I'm putting her to sleep finally at the end of the day, but I can listen to choral music and I can let it lead me back. So I think
Hmm.
I'm trying to meet my own exhaustion, which is one of the huge barriers to my pursuit of quiet, with things that, a scroll through, this scrolling of Instagram just does not bring me to a quiet place. Perhaps it does for other people. It does not for
Hmm.
me.
Yeah, well,
I would risk saying that for many
I don't
people,
know
it
of
may
any
not.
research that supports that theory. Some people may say it does, but I don't know I don't know of anyone who, yes, scrolling through social media or
Scrolling through
something
social media and
would
headlines. So,
not necessarily, it would not calm anyone and walk it back. And I like how you mentioned the walking back. It kind of reminds of rhythms or habits, because there's so many things that talk about at night that you should shut the screens down, all of that stuff. And I have noticed that on the nights where I'm working and I'm busy and I have lots of things and I'm trying to get this done and trying to get that done, that then I'm like, okay, now I'm tired and I want to fall into bed, but I can't go to sleep. I'm tired, but I can't go to sleep because
yeah,
my brain is still so busy. I can't go to sleep. And so those rhythms of finding a way to kind of, whatever they may be,
yeah,
listening to choral music or listening to jazz or
yeah,
reading, it's like only 8 minutes. I think I could do 8 minutes.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, like it doesn't require a half an hour or an hour.
Yeah,
Eight minutes of reading that. And I do. I enjoy reading. I stopped reading a little when my kids were little and started getting back to it. And I have for years, which I do enjoy. But finding those things that will truly calm your brain down, not
yeah,
and your body, so that you can rest and that you rest well and go to sleep well.
right. Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Yeah. So I like those. And in the book, what are some other tips or things that you have found in your research? Because you're still researching it apparently, and still looking at that. So we will look forward to other things that you have going forward. What would you say is I would say one of the most helpful things for someone who's going, this is great. I want to implement it. I'm gonna be okay with sitting with myself. I'm gonna do this. And you've given a lot of great ideas. Are there any other things that you would tell people in implementing this to help them?
Treasure the small moments. I
Mm,
think we tend to think of any spiritual feat or academic feat or anything we have to be able to do the big things in order for it to be real. And I
yeah.
think quiet is not so much about big moments, it's about small moments of faithfulness.
Mm,
It's a million small moments put together. And I think I've been frustrated so many times in the last few years by not having extensive times to read and pray. But I just have increasingly found that when I turn the 30 seconds I have, the 5 minutes, the 10 minutes I can manage before falling asleep, those small moments add up to a treasury of a life, that they add up to a different kind of way of living and praying and seeing. It's very much Brother Lawrence from, medieval monk said, practice the presence of God, practice while you're doing dishes. My spiritual director says, anything becomes a prayer. You can either say,
yeah.
I am so frustrated by this day, or you can say, I'm so frustrated by this day, Lord. And then it becomes a prayer. And so
Yeah.
I'd treasure the small things and turn everything into a conversation with the Lord. Because it is in the smallest of spaces, the most ordinary of moments, that the quality and direction of our lives are created.
Yeah, and I'm reminded of that. There have been a few times in traffic where I have said, "Okay, Lord, they obviously need to be somewhere quicker than me. Help me, bless them."
Yeah.
So just as you mentioned, just those little things in life that
Yeah.
you're going through. And when I'm like, oh my, I have to get the laundry done. You know what? Thank goodness I have a washing machine, and thank
Yeah.
goodness I have clothes to wear, and I have
Yeah.
choices to make
Yeah.
as far as that goes. So there's so many opportunities for us to look for that. Well, I love that. And as I mentioned, one of the things that I like to ask people is, what would you say to encourage someone to pursue the passion in their heart. And I put that in a question, and you had a great quote by Frederick Buechner. And since I have it in front of me, I'll read it for you. But he
Right.
said he writes that vocation is the place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet. And I love this. And I also love that your pursuit of quiet is a deep hunger in this world.
Mm.
And so I thank you that you have made this your work and that you're sharing it with everyone else, because I think it will bless so many people. But I would love to hear what you would say to encourage someone else. Quiet may be their thing or something else that God has placed on their heart. But what would you say to encourage them to actually pursue that and do that?
I think God is as multifaceted as every person that is born, but each of us bears
Mhm.
a different aspect of his image. We are
Mhm.
all meant to shine forth a different aspect of what it means to be made in the image of God. And I think every single person bears something they have been given by God to bring into the world, something matchless. And I think in that sense, that's why I love the Buechner quote, because whatever we are or whatever we have to offer, it is needed. It is the hunger of the world. We work with Christ in offering ourselves as he did to a
Mhm.
hungering world. And whatever vocation I think God has given, it is it is for the good and the beauty and the building up of the health of the whole world.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you. Thank you for that. And Sarah, is if somebody wants to connect with you and they want to get your book, learn how to be a little quieter in their life, what is the best way for them to connect with you?
So you can find everything about me on sarahclarkson.com.
Okay.
But I write quite regularly at my Substack, which is under my name, Sarah Clarkson, but the title is From the Vicarage.
Okay.
So you can find me quite easily there. Or I am on Instagram still, at least occasionally. My handle is Sarah Wonders, Wanders.
Okay, very good. Well, Sarah, thank you again so much for all of your work and sharing that with us. And I wish you the best in being having some quiet moments with lots of young children and that. So I really appreciate your taking the time to speak with us and share and everything that you've done with quiet, because I agree that this is very, very needed in the world today.
Well, it's a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.